Hello. Today what we're going to be doing is that we're going to be doing an identification of glucose. The indicator that we're going to be using today is actually called Benedict's solution. For this one we will be having to put the test tubes in a hot water bath. The hot water bath is set at 62.5 degrees Celsius so that the Benedicts can actually react with the glucose. So we're going to start off. With having our test tubes. Since we're putting these in a water bath, we need to be able to label our test tubes. So we're going to be writing on our test tubes. We'll be writing down on numbers which correspond to the solution we're going to be adding. Okay, now that our test tubes are labeled, let's start adding to them. For the first test tube, we're going to be adding distilled water. The reason why we test distilled water is that we know that distilled water does not contain any glucose, so therefore this is going to be our negative control. Adding 5 drops. Next, for this test tube, I'm going to be adding 5 drops of Benedict's. So now we can see bright blue solution. For our next test tube, we are going to be adding glucose. Glucose contains glucose, so therefore glucose will be our positive control. 5 drops. And now let's add our 5 drops of Benedict's. For the next test tube, we are going to be adding our starch solution. And now we're adding our 5 drops of Benedict's. For the next test tube, we are going to be testing starch solution again. So I'm adding my 5 drops of starch. But we are also going to add 2 drops of hydrochloric acid. And this is try to see what would happen if we tried to break down the starch. Now I'm going to be adding our Benedict's to it. The next test tube that we're going to be testing is brown sugar. So this is just our run-of-the-mill brown sugar. It's not cane sugar. It's not any specific special brown sugar. The next test tube we're adding is actually corn syrup. Adding the Benedict's. And finally, for our last test tube, we are going to add sucrose, also known as white sugar. This is the white refined sugar. And finally, our Benedict's. So, if we're looking at our test tubes, right here, we can actually see that all our test tubes, all of them are blue. They all have our Benedict's in it. So now, this is our before color, okay? So the Benedict stays blue for all of them before. And now we're going to be putting them in our water bath, also known as our test tube jacuzzi. So let's put them in the water bath. So this is our water bath right here. We have our water here. We have our test tube rack in the water, and we're putting our test tubes in the water. We'll make sure that the water covers our test tubes. Okay, so we're going to leave them in here for at least 5 minutes. So we're coming back. Okay, now we've taken our test tubes outside of the water bath. They've changed colors, so let's look at what we got. This is our first test tube. This is our negative control. This is distilled water. You can see it stays blue. This is our glucose test tube. The glucose test tube is our positive control, and it's a brick orange. This test tube is our test tube that has starch in it, and it stays blue. Next test tube is the starch with our hydrochloric acid inside of it, and it turned brick orange. This next test tube, this one is the brown sugar. We can see that it's blue, but there's also some orange in the on the bottom. So this one, it has a little bit of our glucose, right? It's turned a bit green. This one is our corn syrup. So we can see our corn syrup. The color has now turned brick orange. And finally, this sucrose, or white sugar, it has stayed blue. So these are all our results. So therefore, we can actually see which ones of these have glucose and which ones don't. So we can see that our glucose has glucose, that our starch with hydrochloric acid, we were able to obtain some glucose in there too. The brown sugar, just a little bit, so it has some glucose in it. And finally, our corn syrup. This one has glucose as well. Okay, perfect. So those were our results. Thank you very much.